from Amazon over the weekend, and of course it doesn't work. So I'm going to start going over Chapter 3. If you're following along in the book, I'm on page 101. Two good things about this chapter. Number one, I think it's the shortest chapter in the book. And number two, there's nothing in here you don't already know. So we're going to go over it fairly quickly. Now, I do want to mention with the day off on Friday, that kind of screwed up everything a little bit. I have to talk to Charles. I went into the office twice and he wasn't in there. Typically what happens is he lets Paul teach the class and he goes back into the office, but he hasn't yet. I'm not sure if we're still going to have that person come from Verizon this week that I told you about. My hope is that we don't. I'll find out before the end of class. If we don't have them coming tomorrow, tomorrow will be the hands-on test. You already know there's 3 questions. You already know what the 3 questions are. All right? So day 1, we went over Chapter 1. Day 2 was a lab. Day 3, we went over Chapter 2. Day 4 was a lab. All right? And this is, so we're here now, but like I said, this is skewed up, screwed up, whatever you want to say. So we took the written test today, so the idea is that we will do the hands-on, hopefully, like I said, tomorrow. So I'm going to lecture right now on Chapter 3. I'm not going to sit there and keep updating the syllabus. It just doesn't work. So what I'll do is I'll try to make sure by the end of the day I always let you know what's going on, and I'll start up every period by letting you know what's going on. If you have questions, as always, just email me and let me know. All right? I will tell you, everything that's been turned in so far, I've graded. If you have not turned in the work for Chapter 1 or the work for Chapter 2, turn them in. Get some credit for them. If you lost points on those, I'm not going to mention who, but there was at least one person. There was a program in there you were supposed to put in a comment. And people put in comments. But if you put in comments and you put it into the wrong place so your program doesn't work, I took off for that. All right? On one of the debugging exercises, you were supposed, I think it was the first one, but I don't remember for Chapter 1, they had no semicolons in there. If all you did was reproduce that, you didn't put any semicolons in, I had to take for granted that you didn't know how to do it. So I took off for that. All right? A couple of you for the Chapter 2 programs, you were supposed to actually write the program. And if you did a console app and all you have in there is a main with nothing in it, I took off for that. Does all that make sense? All right. I mean, you're more than welcome to fight me on any points that, where you think I've made a mistake or whatever. And you should do that. You should fight for every point you can. All right. I've already graded on the test you just took. I graded the front page and I graded the back page. So I will grade the other 2 pages sometime around 9:30 to 10 o'clock. All right. And you'll get those back today. But again, since Brady isn't here, you'll get those back. You can look at them, but I'll need all 9 of them returned by the time you leave today. All right? Okay, so again, on page 101. So here's our 6, I guess, objectives. You already know how to create a form. You know the difference between creating a new project and choosing console application and choosing Windows Form application. You know that already. All right, we've already gone through that. You know how to use the toolbox to add a button to the form. I've shown you multiple ways of doing this. You can double click on the button tool, which automatically puts it in the upper left-hand corner of the form. You can single click on it and put your mouse on it, single click and drag it over. If you've got multiple buttons, you can use copy and paste. That's at least 3 ways. And that works for both buttons and for labels and for text boxes. All right? I'm asking you this question. What's the difference between a label and a text box? I'm asking you that question.
Text box you can write in whatever.
Right, a text box is for input or output, and a label is typically used for a heading. You can use it for other reasons. You can also, and I've done this on several of the programs we've gone over already, you could take a text box and make it read-only. Then it acts kind of like a label. On the other hand, this language is another one of those languages that's known as being an event-driven language. All right? So literally the program sits there until you do something. And it reacts if you've written code to make it react. You've seen this before. If I put a button on a form, but I don't put any code for the button, if I run the program and click the button, it looks pushed in, but nothing happens. All right? The name forms and controls, one thing they're going to show you in here, this is something relatively new, just so you know. So let's say that, I told you about putting your controls out there, renaming them, and then writing the code. Well, let's say you still screwed it up. There's something fairly new in here that's called refactoring, that they claim at least that even if you've named your things incorrectly, label 1, label 2, etc. All right, that you can go back and change them, and it'll change everything. Now, I did not take off. For example, when you were supposed to create that wine glass or the letter H. A lot of you just called it label 1, label 2, or whatever, and that's fine. I will expect when you take that hands-on test, you're going to name everything. And I don't mean label 1, label 2, text box 1, text box 2. I will look for stuff like that. All right? You know how to correct errors. You know that whether you're using a console program or whether you're doing a Windows Forms application, that down in your error area at the bottom of the page, if you put in something that's syntactically incorrect, if you leave off a semicolon where it's not supposed to be there, if you type in right line and you don't make the L in line capitalized, etc., you will see those errors. Other errors you don't get until you run the program. You've seen some of those already. All right. Deciding which interface to use, again, we've talked about this before, it's a matter of personal choice. Some people like to use GUIs just because of the fact that they're a GUI. All right. And other people say if it's a simple program, I just as soon write a console app. Virtually anything that we do in here this semester, you can do as a console app. I think personally it's harder to do it once you reach a certain point because it involves more code. But if you think, no, I just love console apps, you can keep doing them as long as you can keep getting them to work. On the test, it says write a GUI or a console for each one of these 3. Okay, if we take the test tomorrow, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the key that I wrote on Thursday. And I did every one of them, all 3 of them, as both a console app and as a GUI app. So you can see the difference. Now, I'm not going to probably, if we're going over this, first of all, I'm not going to tape it because Evan may end up giving this test again, next semester or whatever. So I'm not going to tape. You can write down whatever you want, but I'm not going to tape it. And second of all, I'm probably not going to build it in front of you. I've already got it built, so I'm just going to go over the code. I want to give you as much time as possible so that you can work on the homework. And as far as that goes, let's say that you've got 16 problems and you're supposed to write 13 programs. And you're like, you know what? I can't. I don't have time. I don't understand it. I don't whatever. And you only do 6. Hand in those 6. I want to be able to give you some credit. All right? I want to be able to give you as much credit as I can. If you hand in nothing, okay, that is 14 assignments that are worth 10 points each. That's 140 points. That is the equivalent of 1.5 tests. And it's not when they drop your low assignment, if they drop your low one, that'll drop one of those 10 points. It won't drop 140 points. So it's possible you can do A work, but if you aren't turning in those homeworks, you might end up with a C+. All right? All right, enough sermonizing. So the environment the user sees is the program's interface. So you should know what an interface is. You should know how to create a form using the IDE. What does IDE mean? What is it? It's an acronym. It stands for what? Anybody remember? IDE. Integrated Development Environment. The IDE that we use in here is Visual Studio, in particular Visual Studio 2015. It's the same one that you will use next semester. All right? All right. To create a form, Windows Form, you select New Project and you choose Windows Forms application. You know this already. Hopefully, you understand what's on the screen here. This is also on page 103, the top of the page in your book. So you know that you choose Windows Forms application, and if you want a console, you choose console application. We've talked about before the fact that you want to make sure your location is set correctly, that you name it, and as soon as you change the name here, it changes the name down here also. All right? You want to make sure that create directory for solution is there, and that said, I don't care if it's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter whatever. Some of you for chapter 2, all you turned in were your .cs files. I don't want that. I want the whole project. So I want that to be checked. All right? Does that make sense to everyone? If you're going to do a Forms app, I want all that stuff. I can't, whether you did it as a console app or a non-console app, I want to see everything that you've got. All right. That's pretty much it. Any questions on this? Is there anything that's there that doesn't make sense to people? All right. So, hopefully, tomorrow when or if the test is tomorrow, when you're told to come in and start building those apps, boom, you just start doing it. All right. They do mention, it says that it shows you the name of the app in a bunch of places. You'll see it up here, and you'll see it a few other places. That's not that big a thing. You should know what the toolbox is right now, what the form designer is. The form designer is basically what you see in the center of the screen. There is a form designer.cs file. That's one of those system files. You can look at that. Don't jack with that. All right, I've seen people do that where they just, I think this is spelled wrong. They just change it, their program doesn't work now. All right. The error list is on the bottom of the screen. You know where the Solution Explorer is. That's up here. Underneath it is the Properties window. Shouldn't be anything new there. So there's everything. All right. The other thing I want you to understand, we haven't talked about this, but I want you to understand this. This right here where it says Windows Application, that thing, that's the name of your project. The thing up above it that says Solution, Windows, whatever it is. All right, that's a solution file. The reason I'm telling you that is let's assume that you've got a form on here and you want to make a copy of it. Okay? Then you right mouse click on it and you choose copy. Then you right mouse click on the project name, not on the solution name, but right mouse click on the project name and choose paste, and it'll make another copy right underneath it. And another way you can add forms and do things, you always want to right mouse click then on the project name. You don't want to do diddly with that solution file. You should never have to touch it. The reason I'm bringing it up though is it is possible, it is totally permissible in this language that you can have more than one project under the same solution. We won't do that, but you can do that. All I'm telling you is never monkey with that top file. Don't right mouse click on it, don't do anything to it. All right, again, the rest of the stuff that's in here should make sense to you. It says Toolbox tab. We've talked about this, and if you click it, it brings out the toolbox, how it's got the little pin on it, and if you pin it, it'll stay there. But it only stays there when you're in design mode. It doesn't show you the toolbox if you've got the code up. All right? The error list is down on the bottom of your screen. All that stuff is mentioned there. I don't think there's anything I haven't gone over. So again, everything that's here should make sense to you. Where it says Form 1, as it mentions, that's the text property. Where it says Form 1 right here, that's the name property. All right? So you can always rename things in a lot of different ways. The easiest way to rename something, if I didn't want this called Form 1, I'd right mouse click on it, choose rename. That would go and rename everything. But as we've talked about before, if you're going to create a GUI and you're going to put a bunch of controls on there, you want to put the controls out there, rename them, and then add code to them. Yes?
On renaming things, how come when we rename like the form and stuff, it still has program.cs? How do you rename that?
This?
Yeah. Will that ever be named?
I think you can rename. If you try to right mouse click on it, that's the corresponding code file for this. So that's where you're going to stick your C# code. I don't know why you couldn't rename it. Did you ever try to?
No, I was wondering, should we rename it?
I wouldn't touch it. I'd just leave it the way it is. It's not going to hurt anything being called that. but make a dummy project and try it. You know what I'm saying? The text or the form has certain properties with it. You already know, again, that's the text property. You can change the back color on it. You know, there's a lot of different stuff that you can change. We talked about the accept button, so this isn't new. That's the one that automatically gets executed when you hit the enter key. We've talked about back color. I talked to you about the cancel button. Remember, back color is the background color of the form. Fore color is the text color on the form. Name, we've talked about. Size, you can manually, so if I put a form on the screen, I can stretch it. I can click on it where I get those little white sizing handles and I can drag down and that'll resize the form. I can also go into the form itself and it has a property called size. And if it's set to 300, 300 and I want to make it 400, 400, I just change it. The first number listed, I believe, is the width. The second number listed, I believe, is the height. Almost every control has got a visible property, and if you choose that, it's a true-false, meaning it's Boolean. If it's set to true, it is visible. Virtually all controls are visible by default. All right. Using the toolbox to add a button to the form, again, I don't want to go over that again. We've done that already. I believe you all know how to do this. Kind of an important point here. It says all windows in C# can be made dockable, and I showed you that before. You may or may not have noticed that when mine came up, my error list on the bottom wasn't really attached to everything, so I dragged down on it. So if you click on any of the things that you see in your form, if you click on any of these things that you see, of course, I have to keep going back and back. But if you click on any of these things that are in here, if you click on the form, if you click here, if you click there, etc., they're all what's called dockable. So let's assume that for whatever reason, Ethan wants everything that's over here to be over here. You can do that. You can literally click on this and drag it over. Click on this and drag it over. You can do that. I'm going to recommend that until you get really comfortable with it, you don't do that. But if you do that, and after you've done that, you decide, you know what, I really and truly wish I hadn't done this, all right, you can go back and you can reset everything, and they show you how to do this. That's on the bottom of page 107, okay? If you've got a control you put on a form and you decide you don't want it anymore, you can hit the delete key. If it has code, though, you shouldn't hit the delete key. You should first, as we talked about, go into that, click in your properties window on that lightning bolt, remove the reference to the code, all right, which should remove the code, then remove the control. All right, and a couple of you have asked this. I think, Drew, you had a problem with this last week, and it wasn't really anything you were doing. Somehow things got funkied up. I don't know how. But in the worst case, what you'll want to do then is literally start over. All right? Next semester, not this semester, but next semester, we're going to start building ASP.NET apps the first day. Then when we get to about chapter 8 in the book, it says, you know, when you do this, you really should do it this way. I wish they had mentioned that from chapter 1. I don't want to go into it on day 1 because it's confusing. So we will talk about how to change it at that time. But they show here a button being dragged onto the form. I don't think there's anything there you don't know. I think you understand these different properties of buttons that are explained on 109. I'm asking, am I right in assuming all that stuff makes sense to you? Now, what may or may not make sense to you are these things that come up here. Again, this thing that's right here, that's known as a method header. So let's break down each one of the things that's in there. The first thing says private. Private is called an access specifier. What private means is only this class, all right? So only basically this program will be able to tinker with that button. Does that make sense? It's only available in the area in which it's defined, for lack of better words. Void means that this routine, this button click routine, doesn't return anything. All right? Button 1 underscore click means they were stupid and didn't rename the button after they put it on the form. All right? The other two things may or may not make sense to you. Object sender and event args E. Object sender is who clicked the button. How did it happen? Typically, it's you that does that action, so you hardly ever, in this language, you hardly ever do anything with sender. Now, event args E, you might do something with. All right, let's say Amin is creating a C# game. And on the game, he wants to be able to have maybe some kind of a rocket launcher that's able to move around on the screen. Then what he might want to use is he might want to use mouse coordinates. That makes sense? You know, to position it on the screen. That's what event args are. Those are arguments that you can pass. Now, to a button click event, you never worry about the sender or the args. Really, about the only time you worry about args are when you're doing stuff with a mouse or something like that. All right? But other than that, these are things that are in here. They're automatically there, but you don't have to worry about them. All right? All right, then we've got static void main. You should know what this means. Static, in this case, means there's only one of them. There's only one main in a program. There can be only one main in a program, all right? There must be a main because that's the entry point into the program, but there can only be one. Main does not return anything, so its type is void. Main does not require any arguments, so it has just an empty set of parentheses. And its name is main. All right, so that's what everything that's in there means. Now, they do mention all this other stuff, I guess, so that was my take on it. If you want the authors, you can look on page 111, and the author in there explains the access specifier, explains what static is, explains what everything is in there, okay? If you like the author's explanations better, not a problem. All right. The author has one of her famous two truths and a lie then on page 112. And then after that talks about adding labels and text boxes. All right, I asked the question before, Valerie answered it, she was correct. All right, so a label, as it says, it's used to display text to communicate to the user. Oftentimes, it's going to be a heading for the text box that appears under it or to the right of it. All right, but one thing about a label is labels cannot receive the focus. So when the program's running, you can't click on a label. You can't tab to a label. That's just the way it works. On the other hand, as mentioned, a text box is where you can either input data, have data output, or both. All right? So here's a program on page 114. Not really a lot in that program, but you should be able to look at something like that, and at least ideally, it makes sense to you. All right. There's other things in here that we've talked about. For instance, when you've got the label and you put it in, I mentioned to you that by default, the auto size on here is set to what's called true. So if I go and type in, enter a number, that label will expand, even if auto size is set to true. All right, it'll expand, but it'll be big just enough to hold whatever I typed in. If I change auto size to false, I can make it as wide or as narrow or as tall or as short as I want it to be. Now, taking a look at the code that's right here. This is page 115 on the text. I'm asking this. Does everything that's in here make sense? All right? I'm going to assume that at least to one person it doesn't, but you don't want to say anything. So let's go over, there's only about 10 lines in here, so let's go over those 10 lines. All right? First of all, it is totally legitimate that if I write a program, I'm not going to show it on the board or anything, but if I write a program, and let's say that I've got two numbers in there and you want to add them up, so I put a button in there that says calculate. What we'll get to later on in the semester is not only might you want to put that in there as a button, but maybe you want to make a menu option. So maybe you want a drop down that says add, and if you click it, it does the addition. Does that make sense? So you might want to be able to do a sum from more than one place. So what we'll eventually do is we'll take the code that does this, that does the sum, all the stuff that's in here, we'll move it into its own routine. That's in like chapters 8 and 9 or something like that, or 7 and 8, I don't know. So it'll be a ways up, but we'll go over that. But what this does, this declares three variables right there. That's a variable declaration. That's not an initialization. Some of you got that wrong on the test you just took. If I said int num1 equals 0, that would be both a declaration and an initialization. But those are three variables we are declaring. We're not giving them any values. All right? I do want to mention something, and I don't know why the author doesn't mention it here. I wish that she would, but she doesn't. So I'm going to grab this, and I want to bring the same program up. And I want to bring it up in here. Yeah, of course, it formats it beautifully for me. All right. But I think this is important enough to bring up and talk to you about right now. And after I go through this, you might think, wow, you just spent a lot of time going over that. It really wasn't very important. Yes, it is. All right. So this is the program that the author has in the book that's on page 115 at the top of the page. There is absolutely no reason that the author couldn't have done this. The advantage of doing that, hopefully it makes sense to you, you cut the number of lines you have in half. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. That would work just fine. All right? But whether you do it that way or whether you do it the way that the author shows it on page 115, like this, all right? If I don't put something numeric in that first text box and or I don't put something numeric in that second text box, the program will blow up. That should make sense by now to all of you. So I'm declaring three variables right here. They're all integer variables, meaning that all of them can only hold whole numbers. All right? Then I'm attempting to take whatever I put into the first text box, convert it into a 32-bit integer, and assign it to num1. Then I'm taking whatever is in the second text box, attempting to convert it to a 32-bit integer, and assign it to num2. So if I have put whole numbers in both those text boxes, num1 now holds what's in the first text box, num2 now holds what's in the second text box. Sum will then add the two values together, and then I'm going and doing it in reverse. So here I'm grabbing stuff from my interface and assigning it to variables. Here I'm grabbing a variable and I'm assigning it to something that's in the interface. Does that make sense? Because if it doesn't, please ask. All right, and if it still doesn't, and you say I can't ask or whatever, write the program. It's 10 lines of code. It's worth your time to do that so that it makes sense to you. All right, when you execute your program, as they say there, you can say debug, and you can tell it to either start without debugging, but by default, debugging is turned on. Typically, you want it turned on. And typically, if you run the program and you get a message that says your program has errors, you might have seen that already. You get a little dialog box that comes up. And it says your program has errors. Should we revert to the last time where basically the last run where you didn't have errors? Say no. Don't say yes, because you're telling it to ignore your errors. That's silly. So say no, and then in your error window that's on the bottom of the screen, it should show you the errors. Okay. All right. When you are right here in your program, I have to go back. Let's just see. What we looked at before, so if I'm here, I don't really want to do this, but it's fine. So if I come through here and I do File, New, Project, and I choose But if I come through here, and I will in a second, if this ever comes back up, there we go. Windows Forms application, I'm just going to call this junk because that's all it is. All right, if I do this, I want you to understand something. I'm in design mode right now. So I can go and I can start going to my toolbox. I can pin it. I can drag it over then, and I can put some buttons on the form and whatever. So I do this. All right. As soon as I click this green button right here, and it comes up on the screen, now I'm in run mode. Does that make sense? All right. But let's say, in fact, let's do this. All right, I don't want to waste my time or yours, but since I've already written the code, I'm going to open it. I'm just going to call it button 1. Okay, I broke my own rule. That's stupid to do, but I'm going to do that anyway. So I'm going to do this. Now, hopefully what makes sense to you is as soon as I paste this in, I'm going to get some errors. Why am I getting errors? Why am I getting errors there? What? I haven't written the text boxes yet. All right? So if I put my mouse over it, it basically says they don't exist. Okay? So if I come back here and I just come back into design mode, drag that down, grab myself 2 text boxes, I'm not going to worry about putting nice numbers in there or anything, or nice labels that say what you're supposed to. I'm just going to put them in there. All right. Now when I do that and I go back, all right, I'm surprised. I thought there. Now it works. All right. So now if I come back again and I put a label in here, I'm just going to grab a label. And I am going to come in, even because I'm a little anal this way, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set the auto size from true to false. All right, there it is. I'm not going to change the name or anything like that, but just so that I can see it, I'm going to go to the back color. There's nothing in it really. So I'm going to remove the text that says label 1 in it, and I'm going to make it, I don't know, let's just make it yellow. That's fine. And then I'm going to come up to the text, and I'm going to remove whatever text is in there. All right. Now, if I come in and I run this program, and I come in here and I put a 15 here, and I put a 22 here, and I click button 1. Oh, I think I know what it is, but we'll find out. It doesn't like something, so let's figure out what it was. Oh, we didn't put that line in there that copied it over. So there's the int. What we would want to say here is label1 dot text equals sum. All right? Now, I'm going to get an error. Anybody want to guess why I'm getting an error before I put my mouse there? What is sum? What is it? What kind of variable is it? It's an int. All right? What does label expect? A string. All right? So we say here dot to string. That's it. That says convert it. So now if I come through there and I run this again, and I put a 15 here, and I put a 22 here, and I click there, there's our answer. I'm going to assume that everything I just did made sense to you. That's the crux of this chapter right there. If you can get that, then you're good. But you should be able to write that, and to be honest with you, you should be able to write that yourselves without looking at the book or anything else. And you could, again, you could put a label here that says enter number 1, enter number 2, a label here that says result or sum, and button 1 is a crummy name. And you also should realize now if I leave that blank and I click button 1, I'm going to end up getting an error message. When you get this, it's called the exception assistant. We're going to go over it in a later chapter, but it's telling you. It's trying to tell you what the problem is. View details. Input string was not in the correct format. It wasn't, right? I put something that was non-numeric in there. It was blank. The same thing will happen. So if that happens, just click the X and then just stop the run. So if I run it again, it's the same thing as though, so I'll put a number in here, but in here I'll put in 53, and if I hit button 1 now, it'll work, but if I put an A in there, it's again going to break up. It's not going to, it's going to break, I should say. It's not going to work because there was a non-numeric character in there. One thing you may or may not be aware of, and I probably didn't spend a lot of time going over it. You know, last semester, you know, when we were using JavaScript, and I know, again, that's a 4-letter word. I get that. But in JavaScript, if you put 53A in there and you add it, it works. Because it keeps grabbing every digit until it finds either the end or something that's not a digit. But if you put A53 in JavaScript, it doesn't work. Do you understand the difference? Do you start with a number or do you end with a number? Type of thing. All right. Again, I'm not trying to waste your time. I'm giving you the stuff that's going to be on your next test. We talked about the focus. We've talked about the tab order, and I showed you how to set the tab order. If you don't remember, again, if I want to make sure that when the program starts, that's right there. You know, that's where the cursor is. Then I go to View, and I go to Tab Order, and I want this to be 0, this to be 1, this to be 2. That one doesn't even matter because I can't, you know, I guess I could, but I should make it read only. So there we go. 3. So now notice by setting the tab order like this, to get it to go away, another View Tab Order. Now when I run it, notice where my cursor is. It's always going to be in field 0. That's something you just should do. All right? And I always get, well, what if I don't do it on the test? Are you going to take off? You know, probably not. All right? But as you get better and better at this, if you don't do something like that for an assignment, I might note it once, and then the next time you do it, I might take off. I don't know. All right, formatting data, and judging by the test we just took, some of you had your terms mixed up, all right? This here is also a specifier. This says right there, the total is with a 0 there, this 0 is what's called a placeholder. That's what that is, all right? So that 0 in the curly braces is this. It's a placeholder. And just so you know, it has stolen this, it meaning C# has stolen this from the C programming language. Because that's how they do all their outputting, is they use a statement that's called a printf, which, bless you, which stands for print format. All right, but it's all is done using placeholders like this. Not exactly the same, but that's where this was taken from. Changing a label's font, you know how to do that now. You know that there's that font property. I showed you that. No big thing. When you are doing the test, in all seriousness, when you're doing this test, let's say that Evan's doing the test and he decides he's going to do a GUI for all 3. Fine. Don't spend a lot of time. I don't care if your form is gray on the test. I wouldn't spend any time making anything pretty. All right? Also, the last question on the test is worth 50%. The first 2 questions are each, I believe, worth 25. So if you have 4 hours, and let's just say, you know, Amin says, I'm taking all 4 hours, buddy. Fine. Then you spend the first hour, if you need it, on the first question. The second hour on the second question. But you budget yourself 2 hours for the last question. Does that make sense? If you're taking the test and you don't do well, and you turn in, I don't do this. Maybe I told you about this. I had a teacher, I always remember, when I was in high school, I don't remember what grade I was in, Wally Schoenfeld. He would always write down the time you turned your test in. He would write that out, so you get it back in, 8:32. And the reason he did that was he would say, he didn't like me. He would say, Mr. Scott, did you know you turned that test in and you still had 45 minutes left in class? I said, yes, I knew that. Why do you tell me that? Well, because you got a 6 out of 100 on it. And you might say, well, that's not very good. And it wasn't. And he'd say that in front of the class. He had 3 or 4 of us he didn't like. All right, so he would do that all the time. And then he had a girl in there he really did like. She was a pretty girl, but I don't think that's why. He was an old coot anyway. But he would always say, oh, and Mindy, that's another A for Mindy. And he said, then we have Mr. Scott and Mr. Meisnick. Jim Meisnick, who was one of my better friends. And they're always fighting over who gets the worst grade. You know, again, I remember saying that at the time to myself. God forbid I ever become a teacher. But if I do, I would never try to humiliate a student like that. I always had this, you know, one of those wake dreams where he'd be walking out of class one day and he'd trip over his own 2 feet. He'd fall and break his nose. It was a little out of whack anyway, and it was big. But I just thought that would, you know, that somehow that would be poetic justice. So, all right. But he was also the announcer for our high school team's football, for the football team. He couldn't pronounce names, and the whole time I was in high school, we tied 1 game in 4 years, and we lost every other game. So that was always the joke. Other teams would ask to play us for their homecoming because they knew they'd win. All right. When you're naming the forms and controls, I've shown you the way I do it. So I call it like form, add 2 numbers or something like that. The way that Microsoft used to do it is that way. Then they changed it for a while and you used a 3-character prefix. So for forms, you would use FRM, all in lowercase. Then you would do it everything else in Pascal casing. I don't care which way you do it. I don't care how you name these things, but you should name them in a good way and in a consistent way, really using one of those tools. So if I have a form that's called tax rate, you should either name it something like this, literally form, which is the name it has, tax rate, or FRM tax rate. You should really adopt one of those 2. And the reason you should do that is many of the firms that may hire you are using C++. I'm sorry, using C#. That's the way they typically do it, is one way or the other. All right? And you don't want to get hired in at a place and say, you know, don't worry about it. You know, I'm here and I've got my cape on. You know, I was just hired here and I'm going to show you the right way to do things. All right? Please don't get a job and start there and say that on your first day. All right? Unless you want that to be your last day. All right. Here's that thing they talk about code refactoring. It says, suppose you decide to change the name property of a button. All right, it was called button 1 click, and you want to change it. It says you must refactor the code. When you refactor something, you're changing it. All right. So if my wife and I have like a little, I don't know if you call it a bet or what, okay? She has never seen me in her whole life without a mustache, other than on pictures when I was younger. But if I can get under 200 pounds by the end of the summer, I'm going to shave the beard, and the mustache is going to go too. And she's like, well, good, then you won't look so fat. All right? Okay. But I'm refactoring myself when I'm doing that. Sometimes you call it repackaging. All right? So refactoring, this is on your test in some form or other. As it says, it's the process of changing a program's internal structure without changing the way it works. So to do this, as it says, if you decide you want to change that. As it says, you can change the name of the control, right mouse click on the method, and when you right mouse click on it, click rename. I'm not going to go through this. I don't recommend doing this. Because why? If you rename the stuff, you're explicitly renaming it, right? If you let the software do it, it's implicitly doing it. Anytime I can have control over something, I want it. All right? I've talked to friends of mine, and some of them understand this and some of them don't. All right? I told you how I karaoke. To me, the best song for me to karaoke is to have no background singing whatsoever. None. Because sometimes it's so loud you can barely hear me. Well, maybe people like that. But the point is, if I screw up, I want it to be my screw up. All right? And I sometimes change words in songs because I don't like the way that they were written. But if I do that and I've got background, it's very hard to do that. Because then I'm singing one thing and the background is singing something else. All right? I want control. All right. correcting errors, which has got us on page 120. This is what I mentioned to you. Please look up on the screen here. I can't for the life of me think of a reason you'd ever click yes there. Now maybe you can, and that's fine. If I get that 100 times, I'm going to click no every single time. Because once I click no, down in my error window on the bottom of the screen, it's going to show me any errors the system found. And even if you don't think they're errors, all right, they are anyway. And it doesn't matter what you think, because the program will refuse to finish the compilation process until you fix those. All right, and the biggest one is the one right here, leaving off a semicolon. All right? And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. This won't be till the next chapter, but just so you know, if I do this, let's say I say here, int age equal 21. Then I got some code here. I don't care what it is. And if I say if age greater than or equal to 18, don't ever, 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 for any reason, put a semicolon there. Don't ever do that. Because then what it's telling you is whatever code I have here, it's saying that's an executable line, so it'll always do this, regardless of what age is. If you leave that off, then it'll check it, and it'll only do this stuff if the age is greater than or equal to 18. All right? So you never put that in there. Same kind of thing if you're writing a while loop. So if I said while x is less than or equal to 3, never put a semicolon at the end of that. Ever. Because once you put a semicolon there, it's not a Boolean condition anymore, it's an executable statement. So you never want to do that. All right, we're almost finished. Deleting an unwanted event handler method. I've talked to you about this already, about going over to the lightning bolt, removing the code that's there, etc., so they go through that. Failing to close a form before attempting to re-execute a program. Long story short, you've seen this before. I'm running a program, and I decide, oh, I didn't mean to do that. So when I'm doing this, if I go over here and I go to view code, and I decide, oh, see that? Does everybody know why I just got that? Because the program is still running, and I'm trying to make changes to a program that's still running. You will do that. All right? It's the old joke, if I had a nickel for every time I've done that, I've done it hundreds of times. All right? So you've got to stop it first, then make your changes. Help if you don't know about this most of the time. So if I come through here and I don't understand what toString is, usually I can highlight it like that and hit my F1 function key, and it'll bring up help about toString. All right? There's other ways you can get to it. This is built-in help. Now, it is possible. I don't know why it would happen, because the way I did the install with the Community Edition is probably the same way you did it. But when you do the install, if you do a custom install, you can ask that you not get the help system put in there. Why would you do that? Because it's pretty big. So if you had a computer that didn't have a lot of memory in it, or it was old or whatever, you might not want to do that. Then you're going to have to go out to the internet to get your help. Deciding which interface to use, we've talked about this before. All right? As it says, GUI apps look snazzier. The word snazzy or snazzier is actually on the test. All right? Why? I don't have a clue. I didn't write it. Okay. But it's actually on there. Consoles are dull, but they can be developed typically quicker. She has you create a simple app both in console form and in GUI form. And then basically she says, all right, you're big boys and girls now, you decide which one you want to use. Okay? Tell you what, it's 9:38. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 9:50, and we'll do two things, and the rest of the period is yours. We're going to go over the review questions at the end of the chapter, and after we go through those review questions at the end of the chapter, I'm going to do the test review. Okay? So like I said, about 9:50, please. All right, so here's the review questions that are on page 130 or something like that.
31.
131, thank you. All right, that are on 131, 132, and 133. Question 1. This is almost exactly from the test, I believe. A form is used for collecting, displaying, and delivering information. That's a form. All right, in a Visual Studio main window, where does the main menu lie? Please look up on the screen here. No, don't tell me I closed that. I didn't think I did. There. There's the main menu. It lies on the top of the screen, right? That's it. Shouldn't be hard. Horizontally across the top of the window. In the IDE, so number 1 is A, number 2 is C. Number 3, in the IDE, the area where you visually construct the form is called the form designer. That area, the form designer, is the area, that's this. That's the form designer. All right? Number 4, when you create a new form, by default, its name is B, Form 1. Number 5, the form class has approximately or about 100 different properties. One of those properties is not project name. All right? There is no property that I know of that's called project name. So number 6 is B. Number 7, which of the following is a legal name? Please look up on the screen here. Why is that illegal? The space. Remember, that's the name property. That's not the text that appears. That can have a space in it. But the name of any control cannot have a space. By and large, there's 3 things you can put in there. Letters, numbers, and underscores. That's it, to my knowledge. Nothing else. Number 8. Remember, if it's the text property, either one is okay. You can have a space or not have a space. All right? Number 9. There is no text tool. There is a text box tool, there is a button tool, and there's a label tool. So number 6 was B, number 7 is B, number 8 is A, and number 8 is C, and number 9 is A. Number 10, after you drag a button onto a form, you can double click it, and when you double click it, remember that brings up the associated method. We saw that before when I double clicked the button and it brought up private void button1 underscore click. That's what they're talking about. So number 10 is C. Number 11, the click method, does have a private. It's non-static. What does that mean? It means it doesn't have the word static there. If it doesn't have the word static there, it's non-static. And C, it has parameters. It had that object sender and that event args E. All right? So the answer is for 11 is D, all of the above. Number 12. C# is another one of those languages that's known as an event handling language. So an event is what happens when you interact with your GUI. If you create a button, so number 12 is A. Number 13, if you create a button named Yes Button and you double click it, it'll be D. Remember, this is case sensitive, so since you put a lowercase y there, it's this one because that has a lowercase y. And if you double click it, it's the click event. So you should be able to figure it out, hopefully, if you get a question like that on the test. Just common sense. Throw away all the ones that don't make any sense. Number 14, statements in the click method include both variable declarations and arithmetic statements. So you can do int age equal 21, and then you can do h++, for example. That's what they mean right there. Number 15, a text box, so 14 was C, 13 is D, 14 is C, 15 is D. It's a text box which you can use to either input data or to show the output. Number 16 is C. The value in a text box is automatically a string. That's why, as I showed you, we had to use that two-string method. Number 17, which is a legal name for a text box? The first one is illegal. Again, just the same thing you said before, because there's a blank space in it. Since that's illegal, you know that C could not be an answer, but that is legal. So D can't be an answer. So number 16 was C, and number 17 is B. Number 18, the process of changing a program's internal structure, that's that refactoring or code refactoring. So number 18 is C. Number 19, if you accidentally create a click method, you can eliminate it by, again, hitting that lightning bolt in your properties window and then removing, all right, whatever code is show or whatever thing is showing there. So 18 is C, 19 is B, and 20, the last one, is A. Of the following, the most significant difference between console apps and GUI apps is their appearance. GUI apps, black background, white text, console apps, black background, white text. GUI app has your controls. It's more picturesque. It's, remember the key word, snazzier. All right? Anybody need any of those repeated? Then I'm going to jump right into the test review. All right. Everybody have your test review? Are you ready? All right. Number 1, is it more practical to virtually always use an IDE? The answer is yes, because it does write a lot of the code for you. So again, number 1, yes, because it writes a lot of the code for you. Number 2, does changing a form's name affect the form's visual design? No. Can a form control be relocated on a form? Yes. Must you create a click event for a button? No. But if you don't create a click event for a button, then why do you have the button there? Okay, but you don't have to. So I kept that simple. No, yes, no. Those are really 3 different questions on the test. All right. Number 3, true or false? You should not retain the default names for forms and controls. True. You don't want to call them Form 1, Text Box 1, Text Box 2, Label 1, etc. So that's true. So number 3 is true. So again, number 1 was yes, number 2 was no, yes, no, number 3 is true. Number 4, the environment that the user sees is also known as the program's interface. Here's a little bonus question for you. It's probably not on the test, but the interface is the GUI. Okay, that's the name of it. What do you call the code? It's another word that starts with I. It's the implementation. You guessed it, it was an I word, so that was a good try. All right, it's implementation. A little longer, number 5. What are form controls? Remember this? Labels, etc. I showed you that right from the book. It's worded almost exactly like that. The default name for a form is Form 1. All right. Form controls consist of controls. The funny thing is, it says here it has approximately 30. When we just went over on the review, didn't it say 100? I thought it did. But she gave 2 different answers. We can go, if you want to, just stop for a second. I can go over here and click on the form, go to the properties window. If I really wanted to, I don't want to do that. And I could count. Looks more to me like there's about 30 than it does 100. All right. And the form's text property is what shows on the top of the screen. Again, I know it ticks some of you off, but if I come back here and I click on the form and I go down to the text property here and I type in here, this is the best program ever written. Please look on the screen. It says Form 1. As soon as I hit enter, it changes. That's the text property. The name property is how I refer to something programmatically in code. Everybody have that? No? Yes? Like I said, if you're having trouble typing, at least during the summer, Mavis Beacon, I'm gonna make that lady lots of money.
So on the test, will the answer for how many class properties be 30 or 100?
I'll look at the test and let you know. I'll tell you what, I don't think they're both on there. I think 30 is the one that's actually on there. But if it was 30, if both of them are there, I would accept either answer. Just because she screwed up, I don't want to hold that against you, so. All right, next question, number 6. What is a menu bar? What is the Solution Explorer? Before we do this, just stop for a second. Please look on the screen. There's the menu bar. There's the Solution Explorer. There's the Properties window. And I can make those bigger or smaller as I need to. I didn't touch it that time. I will tell you too that based on grading the front page and the back page of your test you just took, some of you who did really well on the first test did not do well on this test. And I have not even graded the middle 2 pages. But you have to really make sure that you really read the question. And for those 3 or 4 of you who have not turned in any of the end of chapter assignments, again, please try to get them in. I'll give you some points if you get them in today, or you get them in tomorrow, or even Thursday, but please try to turn them in. I don't want to see you fall behind. Everybody have those? All right. Number 7, pretty simple. It's the name property. And that appears, remember, at the top of the properties window. So if you look up on the screen here, notice if I click on this text box and I go up to the very top, what's at the top? The name. Everything else is in alphabetical order, but not that. So it's the name property for number 7. Number 8, those are handles. Again, if you look up on the screen here, they're talking about these things right here. So if I click on this on the form, I get, those are my handles. I can grab on any handle and pull it in whatever direction I want to pull it into. So it's the form or buttons, or it can be any controls. I think they use button on the test, but you grab any controls, handles, allows you to change the size of that control. Number 9, after dragging a button onto a form, well, that'd be nice to put the whole answer in there, isn't it? Hopefully you remember this already, but the answer here is double click. All right. No, and this is, somebody say, hey, Jeff, that's wrong. If the button's name is button hello, it's not going to be hello button. It's going to be button hello click. And there is an underscore in there, so it's button hello underscore click. Maybe I should underline that just so you can see it. Everybody have that? All right, number 10, label. This is a hard one because you actually could make the case for text box right here. But what they're saying is, you know, if I got a calculator and I type in 3 and a plus sign and 13 and I hit equal, would you all agree that it's going to give me 3 plus 13, it's going to give me 16? I can't change that? That's the same way a label works. So if you've got stuff that you don't want to be able to change when the program's running, you put it into a label. What property is used to display a string of characters in a label? It's the text property. So number 10 was label, number 11 is text. Number 12, the controls that you use to enter data are text boxes. And really, it's not text boxes, it's the text box control. Excuse me. Number 13, it again is the text property of the text box control that is used to hold the value the user inputs or that you want output. Number 14, what is the tab order? It's the order that things receive the focus. So as I keep hitting the tab key, it's the next field or the next control that I go to. And you know how to set the tab order, right? View, tab order. We've done that several times now as a class. Number 15, what is code refactoring? This one might be at the end too when we have the definitions. I don't remember. And we went through, I didn't do the example for you, but I went through and mentioned that, for instance, if you right mouse click on a method name, you can choose refactor, and that's when you can rename the method if you want to do that. Number 16. It's what I showed you before. You close the, if the program's running, still running, you can't go back to it and make changes to it. You have to first close the previous execution of the program. What's a major difference between a console, I told you it was coming, interface and a GUI interface? The GUI provides a more snazzy interface. And she actually uses that someplace in there. It's something with snazzy. I don't remember what it was. All right. 18, the list of controls. That's the toolbox tab. I've never heard it called the toolbox tab. I just call it the toolbox. And I'm sure if Joyce Farrell was here, she'd say, fine, when you write your book, then that's what you call it. So that's what she calls it, that's fine. Would you stop it? Number 19, what does the visible property do? It indicates whether or not the particular control is visible. What you'll see as we go on and write more sophisticated programs, I don't ever recommend that you make things visible and then have them become visible again. That's very confusing. All right? Instead of using the visible property, I use the enabled property. If something is disabled, it shows, but it's gray and you can't do anything with it. But if you take things and make them visible and invisible, you will confuse the hell out of your user. Hopefully that's not why you're creating applications. All right? All right? Number 20, double click. Number 21, runtime is when you press that button and the program is actually executing. What we'll get to in a later chapter, so you've seen design mode, you've seen run mode. All right, there's also another mode that we don't get till a later chapter that's called break mode, if you want to be able to go in and debug the program while it's running. But that's the thing for runtime. And for these, yeah, it's pretty big. Let me see if I can cut down the size here that we have with this. Let's make it like 4, 3. Just more. That's all of them. I know that's kind of hard to read, but I think a lot of you like to have all of them there at the same time. I'll leave that up there. When you get it done, the rest of the period is yours. All right? I'm going to go and see if I can track down Charles to find out if that person from Verizon is coming or not, so I can let you know exactly what we'll be doing tomorrow. All right? Then I'm going to finish grading the tests. Give those back. You can take a quick look, but please, again, give them back before the period ends. So tomorrow we'll either tomorrow we'll be doing the test, the hands-on test, or if that person's coming from Verizon, we'll have lab, the Verizon, and then we'll see what we do after that. I don't know. Remember when you're doing these that if you miss one of these, you're technically missing 2 of them, right? Because if it's supposed to be ABC and you do ACB, those 2 are wrong. All right, so this is another place to take your time when you're doing the test. I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna, just for a second, I wanna stop the tape. So this'll come right back, but it'll take about 30 seconds or so.